I found out I wasn't really invited to my sister's wedding while standing in my kitchen holding a mug of cold coffee watching rain slide down the window. They sent me a live stream link. Said grandma was too sick for a big wedding. Said it was easier this way. I was the sister who stayed, who paid, who cleaned up every mess, and all I got was a link. It came on a Wednesday morning right as I was pouring coffee into my travel mug before heading to the office. My phone buzzed on the counter and I saw Mom's name with a subject line that just said, Emily's big day. I stood there for a second letting the coffee drip onto the counter before I opened it. Hi honey, it began like she was writing a grocery list. Grandma June hasn't been feeling well, so the wedding will be small. You can watch the live stream. We'll send you the link. That was it. No. We wish you could be here. No. We're sorry you can't come. Just a link. I wiped the coffee off the counter, my hands shaking. My breath came in short, hard bursts and I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen, each sound louder than the last. I stared at the words, reading them over and over. Live stream. It wasn't like they couldn't afford another chair. I knew they'd rented a venue outside of Salem with string lights and a catered dinner, the kind of place Emily used to cut out of bridal magazines when she was 16. I used to buy those magazines for her, slipping them into her backpack before school back when Mom worked nights and Emily needed something pretty to look at. My phone buzzed again, a second email from Mom, a follow-up like she'd forgotten something. Don't forget, it's Saturday at 2. I almost laughed, as if I'd forget the day my only sister was getting married. I set the phone down and pressed my palms to the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The fridge hummed behind me. Outside, the garbage truck rattled down the street. Portland rain tapped against the kitchen window, steady and soft. I thought about that scholarship to Seattle I turned down because Emily needed help with her tuition. I thought about the nights I worked double shifts, the weekends I missed hanging out with friends, the time I sent Emily money so she wouldn't lose her apartment when she forgot to pay rent. I thought about the day she called me crying, saying she couldn't do college, and I spent hours on the phone telling her she was strong enough to stay. And now a link. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, locking up the small apartment I rented in Northeast Portland. The morning air was cold and smelled like wet concrete. I tucked the email into the back of my mind, letting it sit there like a stone I couldn't quite swallow. At work, the office was the same as always, papers stacked on my desk, a blinking cursor waiting on the screen. I logged in and tried to focus on spreadsheets, but every few minutes my mind flickered back to the email. Live stream. At lunch, I sat with Sophie, who worked the cubicle across from me. She pulled her yogurt from her bag, looking at me with her soft brown eyes. You okay, Nat? She asked. I shrugged. My sister's getting married Saturday. That's great, right? I forced a smile. Yeah, I'm invited to watch it on a live stream. Sophie blinked, her spoon pausing halfway to her mouth. What? Yeah. I let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in my chest all morning. They said Grandma's sick, so they're keeping it small. Sophie shook her head, her eyebrows pulling together. Wow. That's cold. I looked down at my salad, picking at a piece of lettuce. It's fine. It's not fine, she said quietly. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I finished my lunch in silence, nodding at Sophie when she left for a meeting, and then I sat there alone at the break table, the sounds of keyboards clacking in the background. When I got home that night, the rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalks wet and glistening under the streetlights. I changed into sweatpants, reheated leftover pasta, and sat on the couch with my laptop. I opened it, hands hovering over the keys. I pulled up the email, clicked on the link they'd sent, and bookmarked the page. The screen showed a test image of the venue, white chairs lined up under twinkle lights, a promise of what was to come. I stared at it, letting the glow of the screen fill the quiet room. Then I closed the laptop softly, resting my hands on top of it. If this was how they wanted me to be part of her big day, then so be it. If they wanted me to watch from a screen, I would watch. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, the gray light slipping through the blinds. I lay there for a moment, listening to the hum of traffic outside, the pipes in the old building creaking as they warmed up. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder for payroll reports due by noon. I turned it over and let it drop onto the floor, not ready to face the numbers yet. In the kitchen, I made coffee, the cheap drip machine sputtering and clicking while I stood barefoot on the cold tile. I opened the fridge, grabbed the creamer, and set it down staring at the small magnet Emily had made me years ago. It was a photo booth strip from her high school graduation, her smile wide, my arm around her. Back then, it felt like it was us against the world. Mom was working doubles and Richard was hardly home. Emily and I would eat boxed mac and cheese on the floor talking about the futures we both wanted. She told me she was going to be a teacher, have a small house, a garden. I poured the coffee, the warmth in my hands grounding me for a moment. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and tried to push the memory away. At work, I settled into my desk, the hum of printers and phones filling the background. Sophie peeked over the cubicle, giving me a soft smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I shrugged, clicking through spreadsheets. "Fine. You want to grab lunch later?" "Yeah, maybe." She watched me for a second, then nodded and disappeared back to her side. I exhaled, focusing on the numbers, the columns, the small mistakes that needed fixing. It was easier than thinking about Saturday, easier than remembering the email. Around 11, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Mom. "Hi, honey," her voice came through cheerful but rushed. "Just checking in, making sure you got the link." I swallowed, looking at the clock on my screen. "Yeah, I got it." "Oh, good. Grandma June is really looking forward to it, you know. Emily is excited too." I let out a soft breath. "Yeah." There was a pause, then the sound of something clattering in the background. "Anyway, it'll be nice to have you there, even if it's, well, you know, online." "Yeah, sure." She hesitated again, then added, "You know, Emily wanted something small. It's just easier this way." I bit down on my lip, staring at the folder in front of me. "Sure, Mom." "You're not upset, are you?" she asked, her voice softer now. "No," I lied. "Okay, sweetheart, I'll let you get back to work." "Yeah." She hung up, leaving me with the steady click of the second hand on the clock above my monitor. At lunch, Sophie and I sat outside, the cold air sharp but refreshing. She handed me a sandwich, and I took it, unwrapping it slowly. "She called, didn't she?" Sophie asked, breaking the silence. I nodded, taking a small bite. "Yeah. And they're excited. They're all excited." Sophie studied me, her eyes calm. "You don't have to watch, you know." "I do." I picked at the crust, rolling it between my fingers. "It's my sister." She nodded, not pushing, and we ate in silence while cars passed by on the street. That evening, I returned home, the streetlights flickering as I parked my car. I sat for a moment, the keys in my hand, looking out at the empty sidewalk. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was Emily. "Can't wait for you to see the dress," her message read, followed by a heart emoji. I stared at it, the screen lighting up my face in the dark car. I wanted to reply, to say something, but the words sat heavy in my throat. Instead, I locked the screen, shoved the phone into my bag, and stepped out into the cold. Inside, I changed into sweatpants, the fabric soft against my skin, and turned on the lamp in the living room. I pulled out my laptop, opening it again, letting the bright light flood the small space. I clicked the link, once more watching, as the page loaded, showing a countdown to the live stream. I leaned back on the couch, pulling a blanket around my shoulders, the quiet of the apartment pressing in. A memory flickered, Emily at 15, twirling in a dress she'd borrowed for homecoming, asking if she looked pretty. I told her she looked like a princess, and she laughed, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. Now she was getting married, and I was a spectator. The screen glowed in the dark room, the numbers ticking down on the countdown each second, a reminder that the world was moving on without me. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the fridge, the faint sounds of the city outside, and let the heaviness settle in my chest. And as I sat there watching the seconds slip away, I didn't know yet that what I was about to see would change everything. They all said they would pay me back one day. They said it when I was 18, packing away acceptance letters, letting the scholarship to Seattle go while Mom lay on the couch with another fever. Grandma June needed her prescriptions picked up, and Emily needed a ride to school because she was too nervous to take the bus alone. "You're the strong one," Aunt Carol said, patting my arm while she dropped off casseroles we'd freeze and eat for weeks. "You're the sister she needs," Mom added, her voice thin as she sipped tea wrapped in her old robe. So I stayed. I took the community college classes I could afford while working the cash register at the pharmacy, watching other kids in scrubs laugh on their lunch breaks. I sent Emily $50 here, $100 there so she could buy books, pay her rent, get coffee on long study nights. She'd text me, "You're the best," with hearts and smiley faces, and I'd smile, telling myself it was worth it. At 24, I moved into my first real apartment, a tiny space with creaky floors, and I kept sending money home when Mom called saying Grandma needed a new heater or Emily had to pay for lab fees. It became a rhythm, one I didn't even question until it was the only song I knew. Now, sitting on my couch watching the glow of the laptop screen, I wondered if any of them remembered. The next day I called Julia while I walked to the corner store, the cold Portland air biting at my cheeks. She answered on the second ring. "Hey Nat, what's up?" I pushed open the store door, the bell jingling, the smell of coffee and old wood wrapping around me. "They sent me the link, Jules." She was quiet for a second. "For the wedding, yeah." I picked up a carton of milk, checking the date, even though I knew it didn't matter. "They said Grandma's not well, so it's just easier." "Of course," Julia said, her voice layered with the same tired sarcasm we'd both learned to use. "Because it's always about what's easier for them." I set the milk in my basket and grabbed a loaf of bread. "They think I'll just watch it. Smile at the screen. Clap when they say I should." Julia let out a slow breath. "You don't owe them this, Nat." I stopped by the coffee aisle, staring at rows of bags lined up, the smell comforting and sharp. "I know. You don't sound like you know." I swallowed, picking up a bag of dark roast, pressing it against my chest for warmth. "Emily's my sister. She's also the girl who posted those engagement photos without telling you she was engaged." Julia reminded me gently. "And the one who never called you back when you asked for help with moving." I closed my eyes for a second, the memory of carrying boxes alone up 3 flights of stairs coming back like a punch. "Yeah." Nat, Julia said, her voice softer. "You have to stop thinking you're responsible for everything." "I know," I said again, but it was a whisper. I paid for the groceries, thanked the cashier, and walked back, the paper bag heavy in my arms, the clouds hanging low in the Portland sky. I passed by the mural Emily loved as a kid, bright yellows and blues fading from the rain. Back home, I put the groceries away, turned on the kettle, and stood by the window watching drops chase each other down the glass. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Emily. "Can't wait to see you," watching the message read with a heart and a smile. I stared at it, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that came every time I remembered the promises they made, the promises that faded like old photographs. I set the phone down, poured the water into my mug, and watched the steam rise, disappearing into the cold air of the kitchen. The tea bag bobbed in the hot water as I leaned against the counter. Outside, the sky was the color of wet cement, the street below empty except for a single delivery truck rumbling by. I held the mug in both hands, letting the heat seep into my skin. My phone buzzed again, rattling against the countertop. I glanced at it, my chest tightening. It was Emily again, this time with a photo. She was in a bridal boutique, standing in front of a mirror, wearing a simple white dress with lace along the sleeves. She was smiling, her eyes bright, her hair pinned back in loose curls. "Found the one," the message read. I stared at the photo, my thumb hovering over the screen. A dozen memories rushed back. Emily at 15 wearing my old cardigan, asking if it made her look older. Emily at 17 sitting on the edge of her bed crying over a boy who had broken her heart. Emily at 19 calling me at midnight saying she couldn't pay rent, her voice small and scared. I had always answered, always sent what I could, always told her it would be okay. I set the phone down, pressing my hand against my forehead. My laptop chimed from the coffee table, a notification flashing. I walked over, sitting down, the tea warm against my palms. It was a social media post. Emily and Josh standing in a field, the sun setting behind them. Her head rested against his chest, his arm around her shoulders. They were both laughing, the kind of laugh that looked easy, untouched. "Can't wait to spend forever with you," the caption read. I felt something sharp twist in my chest, something that made it hard to breathe. I closed the laptop, setting it aside, and pulled my knees to my chest. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the hum of the fridge, the distant murmur of traffic. I pressed my forehead against my knees, breathing in the scent of tea and the faint trace of lavender from my laundry soap. I remembered Aunt Carol's voice when I told her I wasn't going to Seattle. "You're the eldest, Natalie," she'd said, her hand squeezing my shoulder. "Sometimes we do what we have to do for family." Mom had just nodded, eyes tired, saying, "Emily needs you." And I had said yes. The kettle clicked off, the last of the steam rising into the cold kitchen air. I lifted my head, wiping at my cheeks, and stood up. I moved around the kitchen, putting away dishes, wiping down the counter, folding the towel neatly beside the sink. The small motions calmed me, reminding me I still had control over something. Later, I called Julia, needing to hear her voice. She answered on the first ring. "Hey, Nat." "Hey," I said, sinking onto the couch, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. "What's going on?" she asked. I hesitated, staring at the dark screen of the television across from me. They sent me pictures. Of Emily. The dress, the engagement photos. Julia was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" I let out a breath. "Like I don't exist." "Oh, Nat." I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes. "I know I shouldn't care, but it still hurts." "It's not wrong to care," Julia said softly. "But you don't owe them everything. You don't owe them your life." I swallowed, letting her words settle in the silence between us. "You've done enough," she added. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I know." We talked for a few more minutes about work, about the rain, about nothing at all, and when I hung up, the apartment felt a little less empty. I stood walking to the window, watching as the streetlights flickered on their glow, catching in the puddles on the pavement. My phone buzzed on the table behind me. I turned slowly and picked it up. A message from Emily. "Cheer sur ZM Livestream Dung Hung," it read. I stood there holding the phone, the words glowing against the darkness of the room. I didn't know what to say. I typed out a reply to Emily, paused, then erased it before hitting send. The cursor blinked on the empty screen while I stood in the middle of the living room, the apartment heavy with silence. I placed the phone face down on the table, turning away before I changed my mind. The next morning, I was at my desk before sunrise, the office still dark except for the glow of my monitor. Tax season had turned the days into a blur of numbers and emails, the sound of the printer running constant in the background. Sophie dropped a coffee on my desk, the steam curling in the cold air. She leaned against the edge, her cardigan wrapped tightly around her. "Have you even gone home?" she asked. I forced a smile, rubbing at the tension in my neck. "Went home. Came back." She shook her head, pulling her hair into a ponytail. "You need a break, Nat. I can't right now." I glanced at the stack of files on the corner of my desk, each marked urgent. She tapped her nails against the coffee cup. "You can't pour from an empty cup." I let out a breath, the numbers on the screen blurring for a moment. "I know." Sophie reached over and squeezed my shoulder, her hand warm through the thin fabric of my blouse. "At least eat something today, okay?" I lied. She left, her heels clicking down the hall, and I turned back to the spreadsheet, the columns of numbers grounding me in something that made sense. At noon, Roger stepped into my office, his tie loosened, coffee in hand. "You've been pulling long hours," he said, nodding toward the files. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "It's busy. I can see that." He paused, looking at me with that tired, fatherly concern he reserved for moments like this. "Natalie, you should take some time. A few days." "I can't," I said quickly, shaking my head. "We have deadlines." His eyebrows lifted, but he didn't argue. "Deadlines will always be there. You need to be too." I swallowed, glancing at the clock on the wall. "I appreciate it, but I'm fine." "Fine doesn't look like this," he said, gesturing to the dark circles under my eyes. I didn't answer, and he let out a soft sigh. "Just think about it." After he left, I stared at the open file in front of me, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. The room felt too small, the air too heavy. A notification flashed on my phone, lighting up the screen. Emily had posted another photo, this time of her and Josh at a cafe, their hands intertwined, a cupcake with a small plastic ring on top between them. I remembered the night Emily had called, crying, saying she thought Josh was cheating. She was hysterical, her words a rush of panic. I told her she deserved better, told her to leave him, that no one who loved her would make her feel that way. She had gone quiet, then said, "You always think the worst of people." I closed the photo, locking the screen, pressing it against my thigh until the plastic case dug into my skin. The afternoon passed in a haze of phone calls and emails. At 5, I stood by the window looking out at the parking lot, the rain tapping against the glass. My phone rang, the screen flashing Mom. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I answered holding the phone between my shoulder and ear as I packed up my bag. "Hi honey," Mom's voice was warm, too sweet. "Hi. Just wanted to remind you about the live stream on Saturday." Emily's so excited. I zipped up my bag, keeping my voice even. "I know." She picked out a beautiful dress. "She looks like a princess," Mom continued, a soft laugh in her voice. "That's good," I said, my eyes on the dark clouds rolling in. There was a pause, then Mom added, "You'll watch, won't you?" I clenched my jaw, my hand tightening around the strap of my bag. "Yeah. Oh good. It will mean so much to her." I didn't say anything, and Mom filled the silence with a sigh. "You're such a good sister, Nat." I ended the call after a few more pleasantries, sliding the phone into my pocket. Outside, the rain had turned to a drizzle, the streetlights flickering on one by one. I walked to my car, unlocking it, the beep echoing in the quiet lot. I sat behind the wheel, my hands gripping the steering wheel as the rain pattered against the windshield. They were all living their lives, moving on, planning weddings and posting photos, while I was stuck here trying to keep everything from falling apart. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the rain fill the silence. I opened my eyes when the rain turned into a steady drumming on the windshield. The world outside was a blur of lights and wet pavement, headlights smearing across the glass as cars passed. I started the engine, the heater clicking on, blowing warm air across my cold hands. The drive home was quiet, the wipers squeaking as they cleared the rain, streetlights flashing across the dashboard. I pulled into my spot, cutting the engine, sitting for a moment with the keys in my hand. Inside, I dropped my bag by the door, kicking off my shoes. The apartment felt too still, the silence pressing down on me. I walked into the kitchen, flicking on the light, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. I made coffee, even though it was late, the smell filling the small space, grounding me. I leaned against the counter, scrolling through my phone. Emily had posted another photo, this time of her and Josh holding hands, rings glinting under the cafe lights. Her smile was wide, bright, her eyes glowing with that soft happiness I used to see when we stayed up late talking about the future. I remembered the night she had called crying, saying she thought Josh was seeing someone else. I told her she deserved better, told her she should leave him, that she didn't have to settle. She had gone quiet, then snapped, "You always think the worst of people." I had held the phone to my ear, listening to her breathing, knowing I'd lost her trust in that moment. Now she was marrying him, and I was watching it happen from the outside. My phone rang, the screen lighting up with Mom. I let it ring once, twice, before answering. "Hi honey," Mom said, her voice warm, sweet, like she was talking to a neighbor. "Hi. I just wanted to check and remind you about the live stream Saturday." "I know, Mom." She's so excited, she continued, her words spilling over too bright. "She's been planning every detail." "That's good," I said, keeping my voice even. There was a pause, then a small laugh. "You'll watch, right?" I swallowed, staring at the dark window, my reflection staring back at me. "Yeah." "Oh, that will mean so much to her." Mom's voice softened, like she was patting my hand through the phone. "You're such a good sister." My grip tightened around the mug. "Yeah. Anyway, I'll let you go." "I know you're busy," she said, the words laced with a smile I could hear. "Okay, love you." "You too," I said, hanging up before she could say anything else. I set the mug down, the coffee rippling, a few drops spilling onto the counter. I wiped them up with a towel, my hands shaking. They were all living in their perfect world, planning flowers and dresses, taking photos, posting captions about forever. And I was here working late, pushing through exhaustion, trying to hold everything together, the role of the responsible one they never thanked but always expected. I walked into the living room, turning on the lamp, the soft light warming the corners of the room. I sank into the couch, pulling the blanket around my shoulders, the hum of the fridge the only sound. Outside, the rain slowed, the steady drip against the window filling the silence. Saturday was coming, and they were all ready for it. I closed my eyes, letting out a slow breath, and when I opened them, I whispered into the empty room, "I'll watch." And on Saturday morning, I woke before the sun, the world still and gray. I brewed coffee, the warmth in my hands steadying me as I moved to the couch. I opened my laptop, the screen lighting up in the dim room, the link waiting a single click away. I clicked it. The screen flickered before the image settled into focus. It was a small garden, rows of white chairs lined up under strings of lights, the grass still damp from the morning dew. Flowers were tied to the ends of each row, soft pink and white against the dark green. I turned up the volume, the low hum of chatter and laughter filling my quiet living room. My coffee sat cooling on the table beside me untouched. People moved in and out of the frame, adjusting chairs, fixing decorations, hugging each other as they laughed. I saw Mom first, her hair done up in soft curls, wearing a pale blue dress I had seen in her closet last Christmas. She was smiling, talking to Aunt Carol, who was wearing a floral shawl and holding a small plate of fruit. They both looked happy, relaxed, their voices carrying through the mic as they greeted someone off camera. Behind them, Richard, my stepdad, stood talking to another man, a drink in his hand, his laughter loud enough that it made a few people turn and smile. And then the camera panned, and I saw her. Grandma June sitting in a folding chair, a blanket draped over her knees, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She was smiling, nodding as someone bent down to say something in her ear. She didn't look frail. She didn't look sick. She looked like herself. The reason they gave me, the reason they said I couldn't come, was sitting there in the front row, healthy, present, laughing quietly at something Aunt Carol had said. I pressed my hand to my mouth, swallowing the ache that burned at the back of my throat. The camera shifted again, showing the small archway covered in flowers where Emily and Josh would stand. Guests were filling the chairs, familiar faces, family, friends, neighbors, co-workers. They were all there, all dressed up, waiting. They said it would be small. They said it would just be close family. I counted over 30 people before I stopped. A movement caught my eye, and I saw Tyler, Josh's younger brother, standing near the edge of the garden, his hands in his pockets, shifting from foot to foot. His eyes kept darting around, not settling, like he wanted to be anywhere else. A woman stepped into view, adjusting her dress, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Rachel. She was holding a small piece of paper, her fingers twisting it nervously as she looked down, her lips moving like she was rehearsing something. She was the maid of honor, Emily's best friend since college, the one who always showed up in every photo Emily posted. Rachel looked up, her eyes scanning the crowd, pausing when they landed on Josh, and there it was. The way she looked at him just for a moment before she forced a smile and looked away. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart thudding, the noise of the garden fading as I focused on that look. Josh was talking to someone, laughing, but his eyes flicked to Rachel and his smile faltered just for a second before he looked away. I sat back, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders, the room suddenly colder. The camera moved again, settling on the front row, the seats perfectly lined. Mom, Aunt Carol, Grandma June. And one empty chair. It was right at the end next to Mom, the ribbon tied around it fluttering in the breeze, the sun catching on the white paint. They hadn't even filled it. They had left it there empty in the front row. I stared at it, my chest tightening, my hands cold against the mug I held. That was my seat. I closed my eyes, drawing in a slow breath, letting it out as I opened them again. The music started to play softly, and people began to take their seats, the laughter quieting as the ceremony prepared to begin. Emily appeared at the edge of the screen, her white dress catching in the breeze. She held a small bouquet, her eyes bright, her smile wide as people turned in their seats to watch her walk. Mom reached out, squeezing Aunt Carol's hand, both of them beaming, their faces soft with pride. Grandma June lifted a hand, waving slightly, her smile calm and steady, nothing like the image they'd painted of her being too weak to handle a crowd. The camera shook as someone adjusted it, bringing the archway into clearer view. Emily stepped forward, taking her place next to Josh, who stood tall, shifting on his feet as he looked down at her. For a moment it was quiet, the breeze rustling the leaves, the soft hum of the music blending with the sounds of birds in the distance. The officiant began speaking, welcoming everyone, thanking them for coming, talking about love and family and forever. I sat there wrapped in my blanket, the coffee cold beside me, watching as they stood together, hands joined, heads leaning in close. It was like every photo Emily had posted, every moment she had shared with the world, but it felt different now, watching it in real time, seeing the way Josh kept glancing over her shoulder, his eyes darting across the crowd. And then I saw Rachel. She stood to the side, her hands clutching a small piece of paper, her fingers white around the edges. Her eyes were locked on Josh, her lips pressed into a thin line as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. The officiant continued asking for the rings, talking about the vows, about commitment and trust. Josh turned, taking the small ring from Tyler, who handed it over with a quick, tense nod, his eyes flicking to Rachel before looking away. Rachel's face tightened, her jaw clenching, and she looked down at the paper in her hands, blinking rapidly as she wiped at her cheek. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath caught in my throat, watching the way her eyes lifted, finding Josh again, holding his gaze for just a second before she looked away. Emily didn't see it. She was smiling, so happy, her eyes only on Josh, her hand shaking slightly as she slid the ring onto his finger. Mom was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, Aunt Carol resting a hand on her shoulder, both of them leaning forward, captivated by the moment. The camera panned slightly, the angle shifting, and there it was again. The empty chair. It sat in the front row, the ribbon tied to the back fluttering in the breeze, the spot right next to Mom left open, untouched. I clenched my jaw, pressing my hand against my chest, the pressure grounding me as I stared at that empty space. That was my seat. The officiant stepped back, announcing that Emily and Josh were now married, asking for the maid of honor to come forward to say a few words. Rachel lifted her head, blinking as she stepped forward, the paper still crumpled in her hand. She took the microphone, her fingers trembling as she held it, her eyes darting to Josh, who gave her a small, tight smile, his hand still holding Emily's. Rachel swallowed, her eyes glistening as she looked at Emily, her lips parting as she started to speak. "I've known Emily for a long time," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "and I've seen how much she loves, how much she gives." Her eyes flickered to Josh again, her breath catching, her fingers tightening around the paper. Josh shifted, clearing his throat, his eyes hard as he looked at her. Rachel's mouth opened, her next words caught on the edge of her lips. I reached for the mouse, ready to close the window, to shut it off, to walk away. But the way Rachel was looking at Josh stopped me. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating hard enough to rattle my coffee mug. I glanced down the screen, lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. My finger hovered, ready to silence it, but a message appeared, followed by a small gray bubble with a video attached. "You need to see this." My stomach dropped. I looked back at the screen, Rachel clutching the microphone, her lips pressed together, her eyes flicking to Josh, then back to the small piece of paper in her hand. Another buzz. Another message. "It's about them." I clicked on the video, the volume low, the shaky camera showing a dimly lit patio strung with lights, laughter, and music in the background. The image shifted, zooming in, and there they were. Josh and Rachel. She was standing close, her hand resting on his arm, her head tilted back as she laughed at something he said. His hand was on her waist, pulling her closer, his head lowering, brushing against hers. And then he kissed her. Quick but real. Rachel pulled back, looking around, her eyes wide, her lips moving fast, but Josh pulled her back, his hand, cupping her face, kissing her again. The camera jolted, voices, whispering, laughter in the background, and then it ended. I sat there, my breath frozen in my chest, the sound of the rain outside replaced by the ringing in my ears. I scrolled up, checking the sender. Kayla. I remembered her from Emily's birthday photos, standing next to Rachel, their arms linked, smiling at the camera. The screen flickered, the live stream shaking as someone adjusted the camera, bringing Rachel's face back into focus. She was still standing there, clutching the microphone, her knuckles white. I switched back to the message, my thumbs shaking as I typed. "Why are you sending me this?" Kayla's reply came almost instantly. "She deserves to know. But I can't do it." I stared at the words, my mind spinning. I thought about Emily, her smile, the way she looked at Josh, the way she had always believed the best in people. I thought about the night she called me crying, afraid Josh was cheating. I told her to leave, told her she deserved more, and she had hung up on me, saying I always saw the worst in people. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone against my forehead, the heat of the screen grounding me. My phone buzzed again. "Julia. Hey, you okay?" her message read. I typed back, "I just got something." She called immediately, the ringtone sharp in the quiet room. I answered, holding the phone to my ear, my eyes still on Rachel on the screen. What's going on? Julia's voice was calm, steady. I swallowed my voice, barely a whisper. It's true. Josh and Rachel. Oh, Nat. She exhaled, the sound soft, careful. What are you going to do? I don't know, I said, the words breaking as they left my mouth. I can't ruin her day. You're not the one ruining it, Julia said, her voice firmer now. They are. The live stream shook again, the camera zooming in on Rachel's face, her eyes glistening as she looked at Emily, then at Josh. I don't know, I repeated, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Sometimes the truth finds its way out, Nat, Julia said quietly. Even if you don't say a word. I looked at the screen, at Rachel's shaking hands, at Josh's tight smile, his eyes pleading. And I waited. She drew in a shaky breath, the microphone trembling so hard it knocked against her rings. A breeze caught the hem of her dress, lifting it just enough that she had to press it down with one hand while the other kept the mic close to her lips. She glanced down at the crumpled paper in the grass, then back up, her eyes darting between Emily and Josh. Emily's smile faltered as she reached for Josh's arm, confusion spreading across her face like a shadow. Rachel, Emily said, her voice soft, uncertain. Rachel flinched at her name, her eyes welling up, blinking fast to clear her vision. She opened her mouth, then closed it, swallowing hard, her shoulders rising with each ragged breath. The camera zoomed in slightly, catching every twitch of her jaw, every quiver of her lips. The people in the chairs were whispering now, heads turning, eyes narrowing, sensing the shift in the air. Josh took a small step forward, his hand still gripping Emily's, but his eyes were locked on Rachel. His mouth moved, silent, but I could read it. Don't. Rachel's lips parted, the microphone catching the softest sob as she inhaled, steadying herself. She lifted her chin, wiping a tear that rolled down her cheek, leaving a clean line through her makeup. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered into the mic, her voice cracking so badly it echoed through the speakers, making some guests flinch. Emily's brows drew together. Sorry. For what? Rachel's eyes snapped to Emily, her mouth trembling. I tried to stay quiet. A gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of uneasy shifting the air around them, charged with something sharp and unspoken. Josh's face strained of color, his grip on Emily tightening as he hissed something under his breath. His eyes were pleading, sharp, the vein in his neck visible even through the screen. Rachel, stop, he mouthed, his jaw tight. Rachel shook her head, her tears falling freely, now dripping onto the front of her dress. Her hand holding the mic was shaking so hard she had to use both hands to steady it against her mouth. She opened her mouth again, her breath visible in the cool morning air as she exhaled shakily. I can't, she choked, her shoulders shuddering with each breath. She looked at Emily again, and her face broke, her lips twisting as a sob slipped free. Emily's eyes widened, her hand pulling back from Josh's grip, confusion and fear flashing across her face as she glanced between them. Rachel, what's going on? Emily's voice was louder now, cutting through the whispers of the crowd. Rachel looked back at Josh, her eyes full of something that was almost anger, almost regret. You promised me, she whispered, but the mic caught it, the words echoing across the garden. A collective intake of breath from the guests, Aunt Carol's hand flying to her mouth. Grandma June's eyes narrowing, leaning forward in her chair. Josh stepped forward, his hand reaching out, his face twisted with desperation. Rachel, please, he said, loud enough for the mic to catch, his voice tight and breaking. Rachel stepped back, shaking her head, the tears falling faster now, dripping onto the grass. She hugged the mic to her chest for a moment, pressing her lips together, breathing hard. She looked down, closing her eyes, and when she lifted her head, she turned her gaze directly into the camera, the screen capturing every tear, every tremble. Her lips parted, breath catching as she tried to find the words, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her eyes locked on the camera, on all of us, on me. And with tears running down her cheeks, she opened her mouth to speak. I can't pretend anymore, Rachel said, her voice cracking, echoing across the speakers. Her words hung in the air, freezing everyone in the garden, the breeze catching the edges of her hair, lifting it away from her tear-streaked face. Emily's mouth fell open, her eyes darting between Rachel and Josh, confusion turning into fear, then something sharper. What are you talking about? Emily's voice was tight, her hands trembling as she took a small step back. Rachel's chest heaved, her fingers tightening around the microphone, knuckles white. Josh and I. She choked, shaking her head, her tears falling faster. Josh lunged forward, reaching for the mic, his face twisted with panic. Rachel, stop. Rachel jerked away, holding the mic close to her mouth, her voice rising. Josh and I have been seeing each other for 2 months. The words cracked through the garden like a whip, sharp and final, the air shifting as gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's scream cut through everything. What guests started murmuring, chairs creaking as people turned eyes wide, hands flying to mouths. Rachel sobbed, wiping her face with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. He told me he was leaving you, she cried, her shoulders shaking. Josh grabbed for the mic, his voice frantic. Rachel, stop, please just stop. Emily backed away, her face pale, her hands clutched at her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together. You lied to me, she whispered, her voice cracking. Rachel shook her head, tears streaming. I thought he loved me, Em. He said he loved me. Tyler's voice cut in from somewhere behind the camera, sharp and angry. Say it all, Rachel, don't stop now. Rachel's eyes flicked to him, then back to Emily, her lips trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't. Josh ripped the microphone from her hands, his face red, eyes wild. Shut up, Rachel. Emily slapped Josh so hard the sound cracked, the mic squealing as it dropped to the ground, the screen shaking as someone bumped the camera. People were shouting, standing, moving back, bumping into chairs as chaos spread like a wave. A glass shattered somewhere off screen, the sound sharp, making Rachel flinch, covering her face with her hands as she sobbed. Josh turned, trying to speak to Emily, but she pushed him, her screams rising above the noise. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. Mom stood, her face drained of color, clutching Grandma June's shoulder, her mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. Aunt Carol was crying, her hands pressed against her mouth, shaking her head, whispering prayers under her breath. The camera shook again as people moved, trying to clear the aisle, the microphone on the ground, picking up the sharp breaths, the cries, the broken pieces of what was supposed to be a perfect day. Rachel fell to her knees, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking as she cried. I'm sorry, she sobbed over and over, her voice raw. Josh reached for Emily, but she shoved him away, her bouquet dropping, petals scattering across the grass. I sat there frozen, my breath coming in quick, sharp bursts, my hand over my mouth, unable to look away. The camera tried to refocus the image, glitching, shaking violently as the chaos swallowed the scene. And then, just as Rachel's scream echoed one last time, the screen froze. For a moment, the chaos turned silent, frozen on Rachel's face mid-scream. Her mouth was open, tears streaking her cheeks, hair wild around her shoulders, her eyes wide with pain and something that looked like relief. The image stuttered, the screen glitching as voices warped into static. A high-pitched squeal pierced through my speakers, then dropped into silence, the frozen frame still holding Rachel's image. I could still see the edge of Emily's dress in the corner of the frame, petals from her bouquet scattered across the grass, a single white rose crushed beneath someone's shoe. Then, the screen jumped, stuttered, and the video jolted back to life. Rachel's scream finished, cutting off into a choked sob as she fell to her knees, clutching at her chest, gasping for breath. Emily stood above her, shaking her face, pale eyes red, her hands trembling as she pointed at Josh. How could you? She screamed, her voice raw, breaking. Josh held the microphone, his face red, sweat shining on his forehead, his mouth opening and closing, trying to form words. It's not what you think, he shouted, but the words sounded weak, empty. Tyler's voice cut through the noise, sharp and furious. Say it all, Rachel. Tell her everything. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes, wild tears dripping onto her dress. He told me he loved me, she screamed, her voice cracking. He told me he would leave you for me. Emily let out a sound I had never heard before, a mix of a sob and a scream, her body folding forward as she covered her face. Josh lunged toward her, dropping the microphone, the sound thudding through the speakers. Emily, please, he begged, reaching for her arm. Emily spun, her hand flying, slapping him so hard his head snapped to the side, the sound echoing across the lawn. A crash followed, glass shattering as someone knocked over a table drink, spilling the white tablecloth stained with red wine. Mom stood up, her face drained of color, one hand clutching her chest, the other reaching out as if to grab hold of something to steady herself. Aunt Carol was crying holding Grandma June, who looked confused, her eyes darting between the screaming voices. People were backing away, grabbing their children, whispering, pulling out their phones, recording, calling out to each other. Josh stumbled back, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide, his mouth moving, saying Emily's name over and over. Rachel pushed herself to her feet, screaming, her voice hoarse. "You promised me, Josh. You said you would leave her." Emily picked up the bouquet from the ground, hurling it at Josh, the flowers hitting his chest and falling to the grass. He tried to step forward again, but Tyler grabbed him, shoving him back, shouting, "Don't you touch her." Rachel turned, looking directly into the camera again. Her eyes, bloodshot tears, dripping mascara, streaked down her cheeks. "Everyone needs to know what he did," she screamed, pointing at Josh. Emily dropped to her knees on the grass, sobbing, her hands in her hair, rocking back and forth, her cries sharp and breaking. Josh tried to break away from Tyler, reaching toward Emily, his voice desperate. "Emily, please, I love you." The camera shook violently as people moved the screen, blurring the sound, distorting with screams and crashing noises. Rachel's sobs turned into gasps as she stepped back, covering her face with her hands, her body shaking, her shoulders collapsing forward. The image jolted one last time, showing Emily on the ground, crying, her dress spread around her like a broken promise. Rachel crumpled beside her, and Josh being shoved back by Tyler, his arms reaching forward. And then the screen turned black. My phone started buzzing before I could even close the laptop. The first message came from Mom. "Emily isn't eating. She won't come out of her room. Can you come?" I stared at the words, the screen glowing in the dark room, the rain tapping against the window. Another message came in, this one from Aunt Carol. "She needs you, Natalie. You've always been the strong one." I let out a breath, pressing my thumb against the screen, feeling the familiar weight in my chest. Then Richard. "Nat, it's bad. Your mother is falling apart. Emily won't speak to anyone." And then finally, "Emily. Please." Just that. One word. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. I stood walking into the kitchen, the tile cold under my feet, the rain outside getting louder, heavier. I poured a glass of water, holding it between my palms, staring out at the dark street below. The phone buzzed again. Tyler this time. "Josh is gone. Rachel won't talk to us. Emily needs you." I closed my eyes, pressing the glass to my forehead, the cold seeping into my skin. Julia's name popped up and I answered, not letting it go to voicemail. "I saw the video," she said, her voice low. "How are you holding up?" I let out a laugh that didn't sound like me. "They're all calling." "Of course they are," Julia said, her voice calm, sharp. "They always do when they need you." I sat at the kitchen table, the glass sweating and my hand, water dripping onto my wrist. "They want me to fix it," I whispered, my voice shaking. Again. There was a pause, the rain filling the silence between us. "Nat," Julia said, her voice softening, "you don't owe them this." I didn't answer, my eyes fixed on the drops racing each other down the window. "Don't let them pull you back," she said, firmer now. "Not again." I closed my eyes, breathing and holding it, letting it out slowly. "They're family." "So were you," she said quietly. "Remember that." Another call came in, breaking the quiet, the screen flashing with an unknown number. "Hold on," I told Julia, switching over. "Miss Harper," a man's voice said, steady, professional. "Detective Lewis, Portland PD." My chest tightened. "Yes, I'm calling regarding Joshua Miller. He's in custody," the detective said, pausing. "We have evidence of embezzlement from his company. Rachel Thompson provided documentation." I pressed a hand to my forehead, the room spinning for a moment. "What does this have to do with me?" "Your family listed you as an emergency contact," he said. "They're requesting you come down to speak with them." I let out a shaky breath, pressing my palm flat against the table to steady myself. "I see. We can schedule a time tomorrow." He continued, his voice calm, practiced. "I'll call you back." I managed before hanging up the phone, slipping from my hand, clattering onto the table. I stood there, the rain pounding against the windows, the lights from the street casting shadows on the walls. I walked into my bedroom, pulling the small suitcase from the closet, setting it on the bed, opening it. I started folding clothes, placing them carefully inside my hands, moving on their own muscle memory from every time they needed me, every time I had to fix what they broke. Sweaters, jeans, The black jacket I wore when I drove Mom to her treatments, the same one I wore when I picked up Emily from that party crying too drunk to remember why. The suitcase filled quickly, the zipper closing with a soft finality. I lifted it, carrying it into the living room, setting it down by the door. I stood there looking at it, the rain still falling heavier now, the drops hitting the window like 1,000 tiny hammers. I reached for the handle, my fingers curling around it, feeling the weight of everything packed inside. The weight of years spent fixing what they broke. The weight of all the times I stayed when I should have left. My phone buzzed again on the counter, lighting up the dark kitchen. Mom. Please, Nat. Emily needs you. You've always been the strong one. I closed my eyes, pressing the back of my hand to my mouth, swallowing down the bitterness that rose in my throat. The memories came sharp, uninvited. Nights working 3 jobs, scrubbing floors, closing the pharmacy, tutoring after shifts just to keep the lights on. Sending the last of my paycheck so Mom could pay for her medication, so Emily wouldn't have to leave school, so the heat would stay on during winter. Mom's voice on the phone, always the same, soft and tired. You're the strong one, Nat. We're so lucky to have you. Not once did she say thank you. Not once did she ask if I was okay. My phone buzzed again. Aunt Carol. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. We don't know what to do. Richard. Emily won't talk to anyone. We need you. Emily. I'm sorry. That one made me pause. I sat on the edge of the couch, holding the phone, reading those 2 words over and over, the letters blurring as tears filled my eyes. The phone rang, jolting me. I answered without looking. Miss Harper, it's Detective Lewis again. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, steadying my voice. Yes, Joshua Miller is in custody. We have confirmation of multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Rachel Thompson provided the documentation. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in, feeling them settle into the spaces already cracked inside me. The family has requested you come in, he continued. They believe you can help manage the fallout. Of course they do. Thank you for letting me know, I said quietly before ending the call. I placed the phone on the coffee table, watching the screen go dark, my reflection staring back at me, tired, older than I remembered. Julia called next. I answered on the first ring. They're asking you to fix it, aren't they? She said, her voice calm, but I could hear the anger under it. They want me to come, I whispered, staring at the suitcase. Nat, you don't have to, Julia said. It's not your mess to clean. They're family, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. So are you, she replied softly. When will it be enough? I didn't answer. We sat in silence, the rain filling the space between us, tapping against the windows, the only sound in the room. Do you want me to come over? Julia asked, her voice gentle. No, I whispered. I need to think. Promise me you'll think about what you need, Nat. Not them. I ended the call, pressing the phone to my chest, closing my eyes, breathing in the cold, damp air of the apartment. I stood lifting the suitcase, the weight of it grounding me as I carried it across the room. I set it down by the door, my hand resting on the handle, feeling the tremor in my fingers, the tightness in my chest. The rain outside was heavier now, hitting the window in sheets, the streetlights casting blurry shadows across the floor. I stood there watching the rain slide down the glass, the world outside blurred and gray. And in that moment, I understood. This time I wasn't going back. The rain was still falling the next morning when I woke up. I made tea, the steam curling into the cold morning air, and carried the cup to the window, sitting down on the small bench by the glass. Portland was quiet, the streets, slick lights reflecting in puddles that rippled with every drop. People walked past in raincoats, umbrellas, bobbing cars, hissing over wet roads. I took a sip, letting the warmth settle into me, breathing out slowly. My phone buzzed on the table. I let it ring, let it vibrate until it stopped. It buzzed again, and I reached for it, turning it over the screen, lighting up with Emily's name. A message. I'm sorry, Nat. I didn't know how much I needed you until now. I stared at it, reading it twice, 3 times, feeling nothing but a soft, distant ache. I set the phone down, turning it face down, silencing the next vibration that came seconds later. The steam from my tea fogged the window, blurring the view, making the world look softer, quieter. Josh was gone now, arrested. The news flashing across local channels, neighbors whispering, the family too ashamed to speak. Rachel had packed her things and left town, no forwarding address, no goodbye. Mom had stopped calling, her silence louder than any apology she never gave. I stood pulling on my coat, slipping on my shoes, stepping out into the rain, letting it hit my face cold and clean. I walked down the street, the scent of wet earth and pine mixing with the sharp smell of rain. I passed the small coffee shop on the corner, the windows fogged with warmth, people inside wrapped in scarves, clutching cups, laughing softly. I went in, ordering a black coffee, holding the cup between my hands as I stepped back outside, the steam rising, disappearing into the misty air. I walked to the lake, the water dark and rippling, the rain dimpling the surface, geese huddled under the trees on the shore. I sat on a bench, pulling my hood up, watching the water, sipping the coffee, letting the warmth fill me slowly. I pulled out the small notebook I kept in my coat pocket, flipping it open to a clean page. I took a pen, pressing it to the paper, the ink dark against the pale page. I hope next time the invitation comes before the apology. I tore the page out, folding it carefully, slipping it into my pocket. The rain eased, turning to a soft drizzle, the clouds shifting, letting in a pale sliver of light that touched the water, making it shine. I stood, finishing the coffee, tossing the cup in the trash, pulling my coat tighter around me as I turned back toward home. For the first time, I didn't feel like the one carrying everything. For the first time, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. I stepped onto my porch, water dripping from the edge of my hood, the air fresh, the world quiet. I opened my door, stepping inside, leaving the suitcase by the door untouched. I closed my laptop, pushing it aside, letting the silence fill the room, letting it settle into me. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. I stood up, stretching, letting the quiet wrap around me like a soft blanket. The rain had slowed, tapping lightly against the windows, a steady rhythm that felt comforting now. I pulled on my sweater, stepping out onto the porch, the cool air brushing against my face, waking me fully. The street was empty, the sky a soft gray, the leaves on the trees dripping, the world smelling of rain and pine. I walked down the steps, the wood creaking under my feet, and started down the street, letting my hands slip into my pockets. The coffee shop on the corner was just opening, the lights warm, the scent of fresh bread and coffee drifting out each time the door opened. I went inside, ordered a black coffee, nodding a small thanks to the barista who handed it to me with a sleepy smile. I stepped back out, the cup warm in my hands, steam rising into the cold morning air. I took the long way home, walking toward the lake, the path lined with wet leaves, puddles reflecting the gray sky above. When I reached the water, I stopped, taking a sip, letting the warmth settle deep in my chest. The lake was calm, ripples spreading slowly as a few ducks drifted across, the soft sound of their movements mixing with the rain. I sat on a bench, the wood damp but not enough to matter, and pulled the folded paper from my pocket. I opened it, smoothing it out, reading the words I had written again. I hope next time the invitation comes before the apology. I folded it again, tucking it back into my coat, pressing it close for a moment before letting out a slow breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it out, the screen lighting up with Emily's name. "I'm sorry," her message read. "I didn't know how much I needed you until now." I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen, the rain falling softly around me, the world holding its breath. I pressed the power button, turning off the screen, sliding the phone back into my pocket. I looked out at the lake, the air fresh, clean, the world quiet. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for them to need me. I didn't feel like I owed them my life anymore. They had fallen apart without me, and somehow I was still here, still standing, still breathing. I finished my coffee, tossing the cup into the trash as I stood turning back toward the path, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The rain started to pick up again, but I didn't hurry. I let it fall, soaking into my hair, dripping down my face, washing away everything I had been holding for so long. When I reached home, I stepped onto the porch, pausing to watch the rain for a moment longer. I opened the door, stepping inside, the warmth of the apartment greeting me, the quiet wrapping around me once more. I took off my coat, hanging it by the door, and walked to the kitchen, putting on the kettle, letting the soft hiss fill the silence. I pulled out a clean cup, waiting, breathing, letting the calm settle deep inside. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply leaving. What would you have done if you were me?